So we'll carry on the discussion of the cost of production in this lecture. Rather, we'll be delving deeper into the behavior of the cost of production. And you will be surprised that cost of production pretty much behaves similarly no matter what kind of firms we are looking at, which means cost of production for a pizza shop may be the same as cost of production for the General Motors or the Toyota or even for Amazon or Google. So let's try to understand some of the concepts before we delve deeper into the cost of production. First, let's try to understand something called a factor of payments, which we already did. So factor of payments is what the firms pays for the use of factors of production, which is also the cost from the firm's perspectives. And what are some of the costs? These are raw material prices, rent for use of land, wages and salaries for use of labor because you need labor to produce goods and services, interest and dividends because often you borrow money to build your factory or buy raw materials and you have to pay interest on that, and finally profit. Now you might be wondering why profit is a part of the cost. It's not literally part of the cost, is the residual income. So these are factor payments or payments that goes to the entrepreneur. Question is like, as an entrepreneur, why you try to bring everybody together? Because you have a profit motive. Then let's discuss variable cost. That means cost of variable inputs like labor, which varies with output. This is very much in line with fixed versus variable input that we have done in production function. So variable cost is the cost associated with variable input like labor. And we discussed it before how labor can vary based on how much stuffs you are going to sell. For example, if you're running a coffee shop and you know there's a huge demand for coffee during the breakfast hours, so you try to hire more people during the breakfast hours and you try have less people during the lean hours. Fixed cost, this cost which does not vary with production, and examples of this are basically expenditures that firms make before production starts, and they do not change in the short run. And if you remember, short run is something when some of the factory inputs are fixed and they do not change regardless of the level of production. For example, if you're running a restaurant, your restaurant land is a fixed cost, or a rent you pay is a fixed cost. It doesn't matter whether you sell one pizza or 10 pizza, the cost of providing rent is exactly the same. So finally, we'll define total cost. This is nothing but the summation of the fixed and the variable cost. So when you add up fixed and variable cost, that's is nothing but the total cost for a firm. Let's keep on defining few more things. We'll define average fixed cost. Basically, you take the total fixed cost and divide it by quantity of output. You get the average fixed cost. We'll define average variable cost is variable cost divided by output. We'll define average total cost is nothing but total cost divided by output, which is nothing but summation of the average variable cost plus average fixed cost. And finally, the marginal cost, like the marginal productivity. Marginal cost is change in total cost over change in output. And we often noted this like this. So you have marginal cost is the change in total cost over change in output. So in the last slide, we discussed about different variable cost, fixed cost, and different kind of cost concepts. We are going to do an example using this Excel worksheet to try to understand the behavior of different costs. And this is the Excel worksheet for a separate firm. And let's say it's a pizza restaurant and it sells pizzas. So pizza is the output they are selling and their input is the labor, which is the workers. And obviously there are other stuffs they need. Let's assume those stuffs are all fixed. That means they do not change with the output. So these are the fixed costs. Now, if they don't produce anything, that is zero output, that means they don't hire any workers, because if there's no worker, they can't produce anything. and what they have is the fixed cost of $800. That means the cost that does not change with output. So also we have variable cost. These are variable cost, that means cost which changes output. These are the outputs here, and we see that how this cost increases as you produce more. So using all this information, we'll be calculating total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average cost, and marginal cost. So let's start with the easiest one. This is how much is the fixed cost when you produce one unit. Again, fixed cost does not change with output, it remains fixed. So in this case, fixed cost would remain $800. So we'll just put it $800. And as we said, fixed cost remain fixed. So no matter how many units are producing, whether 200 or 640, your fixed cost will remain exactly the same. Total cost, we all know total cost, total cost is nothing but the summation of fixed cost plus variable cost. So that's your total cost. So we'll try to do it here. So we'll just add up the fixed cost, which is $800, plus we add up the variable cost. When you don't produce anything, is 0. So that's your, and we'll just mark it by red so that it's easier for you to say. So your total cost is same as fixed cost when you don't produce anything, when you don't sell anything, or you don't hire any workers. So we'll just pull it down. So in Excel, you can pull it down like this in the corner. So once this plus sign arises, just pull it down. So that's your total cost for different units. So total cost for 200 units is 1450, 450 units is 2100. That's your total cost. Next, we'll be doing average fixed cost. We know average fixed cost is equal to fixed cost divided by quantity. That's how we calculate it. So in this case, first one, you don't have to calculate, because when you divide 800 by 0, which is the quantity, is not defined. It's a mathematical impossibility. We'll start with the quantity 200. So you do basically like fixed cost 800 over your output, which is, so that's your average fixed cost to produce 200 pizzas. And I'll just put it down, and let's mark all of them with red so that you know this is what we are calculating. Now you might be saying why this is fixed, because we just avoided the zeros. We'll just increase the zeros, and you'll see how this is decreasing. So your average fixed cost is keep on decreasing as you produce more, which is the idea behind scaling up, because your fixed cost or per unit fixed cost keeps on decreasing, which helps to keep the cost low. Next, we'll do average variable cost. Again, like the earlier case, average variable cost is not defined when you don't produce anything. For this, what we'll do, variable cost over quantity is 3.25. Again, let me put it here. Average variable cost is variable cost over quantity. So that's, so we'll just pull it like that. Again, the plus sign has come out. Let's pull it down. That's your average variable cost. So it first decreases, then it start increasing. Then we'll do average cost. There are two ways you can calculate average cost. Average cost is equal to total cost over quantity, or it is equal to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. So you can do it either way. So let's do the way of average fixed cost plus average variable cost. Just add it up. So that's your average cost if you are producing 200 pizzas, and just pull it down. So that's the average cost, which first decreases and then start increasing. And finally, we'll do marginal cost. Marginal cost is the change in total cost over change in output. So we'll do marginal cost is change in total cost over change in Q, right? So we'll try to understand how to do change in total cost. So change in total cost is this minus what when the cost is when you didn't produce anything divided by change in output. Output is 200 minus when you didn't produce anything, that was before just 200. So that's your marginal cost, and we'll just pull it down like that, and this is your marginal cost. As you produce more, your marginal cost first decreases and then it start increasing. So this is the idea behind different cost concepts that we have done so far. One thing you might have noticed, couple of things. First, your average fixed cost keeps on decreasing, right? So average fixed cost, as you produce more, it keeps on decreasing. Average variable cost first decreases and then it increases, which is kind of a U-shaped. Average cost also follow the same structure. It first decreases and then it increases as you produce more. Same is the marginal cost. It decreases first from 3.25 to 2.6 and then it start increasing. So all this average cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost will follow something like an U-shaped, where with respect to quantity, U-shaped with respect to quantity. On the other hand, average fixed cost is always declining, which means it keeps on decreasing. So one good exercise for you is that make sure you draw these graphs. So you put quantity on the x-axis and the cost on the y-axis, and draw average fixed cost, average variable cost, average cost, and marginal cost. And in the next slide, we'll start discussing about the shapes of the different cost curves. So what we learned till now is that cost functions do behave in a particular way. First, let's start with the average total cost. Average total cost is U-shaped. So average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost are U-shaped. That means they first decrease and increase. And in this graph, you measure your quantity of output on the horizontal axis and the costs on the vertical axis. So you measure cost here. And if you do that, as you increase your output, as you produce more, your average total cost first decreases like this, and then it start increasing like this. Same you can see for the marginal cost. Marginal cost first decreases, then it increases. Same is true for the average variable cost. Average variable cost first decreases, then it increases. And that's why these are U-shaped. On the other hand, average fixed cost keeps on decreasing. So this is your average fixed cost, which keeps on decreasing. The reason it keeps on decreasing because it doesn't change its output. So if you produce more, your per head cost or fixed cost keeps on decreasing. And it is also known as scale. For example, why do you think Walmart can sell stuff at a much cheaper price? Because they just operate on a scale. They just operate a huge stores where you can buy pretty much anything. And since the cost of the store is fixed, it does not change with how much stuffs you are selling or what kind of stuffs you are selling. So their cost per unit keeps on decreasing. There are a couple of other things I would like to point out about where these curves do intersect. So before that, let me clear it out. So first you have to understand that marginal cost always intersects average total cost at its lowest point. So here they intersect. So marginal cost intersect average total cost at its lowest point. Same is true for average variable cost. Marginal cost intersects at the lowest point of the average variable cost. So this is the lowest point of average variable cost. So marginal cost, also the gap between the average total cost and average fixed cost. So let's try to understand this. This gap is the average fixed cost. So we all know what's the difference between average cost and average variable cost is the average fixed cost. So this gap is the average fixed cost, and you can see how this gap keep on reducing as you produce more, which is explained in this downward sloping, this downward average fixed cost. So again, let's try to recuperate what we just said. So average total cost is always U-shaped. Average variable cost is always U-shaped. Marginal cost generally is upward sloping, but it also U-shaped. Average fixed cost keep on declining, and average marginal cost intersects average variable cost and average total cost always at their respective minimum points. This behavior is true no matter what kind of firms we are looking at. It can be your mom and pop shop, or it can be giants like Amazon or eBay or Microsoft. So it's true for any firms. So this is very unique in microeconomics, that it doesn't matter what kind of firms you are looking at, their cost behavior are more or less similar.